So today's lesson, we're going to pick up where we left off yesterday talking about bar graphs, and what we're going to get into today is looking at what's known as analyzing bar graphs. So yesterday we did some different things with creating bar graphs and histograms. What we're going to look at today is if you have a bar graph or a histogram, what are some different types of questions that you should be able to answer based on that. So this bar graph here, and you guys can put this in the review section of your answer sheet, these first 5 questions here. So it says the graph to the right shows the birthdays of a class of 81 students by month. Which month did most students have a birthday? So if you look at the graph over here, it has it broken down by month and how many students had a birthday in that month. So for number 1, if you see here, June, which is looks like 10 students had a birthday in June, and that's the highest amount of birthdays that they had in the class. So that's your answer for number 1. Number 2 says, how many students had a birthday in June, July, and August? So if you notice here, there were 10 students that had a birthday in June. There were, looks like 6 students that had a birthday in July, and 1 student who had a birthday in August. So if you put all those together, that would be 17 students that had a birthday in those 3 months combined. So that's the answer for number 2. Number 3 says, how many more students had a birthday in September rather than April? So if you look here in September, it looks like there were 7 students that had a birthday in September, where in April it looks like there were only 3 students. So when the question says how many more students, well, if there were 7 in September and 3 in April, that means there were 4 more students that had a birthday in September than in April. So that's the answer for number 3. For number 4, what percentage of students had a birthday in February? So to take this value and convert it to a percent, and we talked about this when we did some different things with circle graphs, what I want to do is first I want to take how many students had a birthday in February, divide it by the total number of students, which would be 81, times 100. So when I take my calculator here, I got 4 divided by 81 times 100, and we'll round this to the nearest percent. So since this is 4.9%, since it's 0.9, we'll call this 5%. So we'll say that about 5% of the students had a birthday in February. And then question number 5 says, what percentage of students had a birthday in November? So I'm going to do the same thing here. I want to know first how many students had a birthday in November, which you can see here there were 4 students that had a birthday in November. So to find the percentage of students, I'm going to do the same thing, 4 divided by 81 times 100. Well, if you notice, it's the same as what's up here, so I know that that's going to come out to also be 5%. So that's some of the different types of questions that we're going to look at today as far as analyzing bar graphs. So drop down to your notes section. I want to show you a different example here. Actually, you know what? Keep it in the review section. Let me show you these 2, and then I'll show you a different example. So keep this in the review section. Number 6, it says, if there were 800 students in the school, how many would you expect to have a birthday in May? So what I want to know first to answer this question is what percentage of students had a birthday in May? So you can see here, here's May, and there were 8 students that had a birthday in May. So the first thing I want to know is, how do I take the number of students that had a birthday in May and convert that to a percent? So I'm going to do 8 divided by 81 times 100. So I want to do that first. And when I do that, so here I got 8 divided by 81 times 100. And when I do that, I get roughly, since this is 9.8%, we'll call this 10%. So I'm going to say that roughly about 10% of the students had a birthday in May. And from there, what I want to do is I want to know, of those 800 students, how many had a birthday in May. So what I want to know here is, what's 10% of 800? So this is what we talked about previously with bar graphs. So when I do 10% of 800, I'm going to basically take 10%, I'm going to convert it to a decimal, so I'm going to do 10 divided by 100, right? So I get 0.10, and then times 800 would be 80 students. So we would say that if there were 800 students, we would expect 80 of them to have a birthday in May, based on the bar graph that we have over here. So that was number 6. Number 7 says, if there were 800 students in the school, how many more would you expect to have a birthday in June than July? So what I want to know first here is, how many more students have a birthday in June rather than July? So if you take a look at this here, there were 10 students that had a birthday in June. there were 6 students who had a birthday in July. So all total there were 4 more students that had a birthday in June than in July. So what I want to do first, after I subtract and find the difference, is I want to take 4 and I want to convert it to a percent. So I'm going to do 4 divided by 81 times 100. So when I do that, so here I got 4 divided by 81 times 100. So the percentage there would be, if we call this 4.9, this would be 5%. So that's 5%. And now what I want to take is, what's 5% of 800? Right? So what I want to do now is I want to take 5%, I want to convert it to a decimal, so I want to do 5 divided by 100, which would be 0.05. And then I'm going to do 0.05 times 800. And when I do that, I get 40 students. So we would expect 40 more students, 40 more students to have a birthday in June rather than July. And that's how you do a question like that there. So now drop down to your notes section. Let's talk about a different example. So got the same kind of bar graph. Just notice with this that the bar graph, the bars are going horizontally instead of vertically. Usually we're used to seeing bar graphs like this where the bars are going up and down, but they don't necessarily have to. Sometimes they can go sideways like this. So the question here says, the graph shows what a group of 366 students' favorite after-school activities are. And question number 8 says, which activity was the least popular? So I'm looking for the bar that has the smallest height, which in this case would be school clubs. Right? So there were 22 students, or only 22 students, that said school clubs was their favorite activity. So that's the answer for number 9. Number 10, how many students' favorite activity was watch TV? So here's watch TV down here. And then we would say that 37 students said that their favorite activity was watch TV. So that's the answer for number 9. For number 10, how many more students' favorite activity was earn money rather than school clubs? So 44 students said their favorite activity was earn money. Only 22 said that their favorite activity was school clubs. So to find how many more, I would just do 44 minus the 22. And the answer to that would be 22. So that's the answer for number 10. For number 11, the question says, what percentage of students' favorite activity was play sports? So if you notice here, there were 45 students who said their favorite activity was play sports. So what I want to do here is I want to do 45 to convert this to a percent. I'm going to do 45 divided by the total, 366, times 100. So when I go to do that, I got my calculator here, so I'm going to do 45 divided by 366 times 100. And when I do that, I get an answer of roughly, let's call this, we want to go to just the nearest whole number with this, so we'll roughly call this about 12 students. Okay, so there are 12%. So that's number 11. Number 12 says, what percentage of students' favorite activity was chat online? So if you look at your bar graph over here, chat online, that was 66 students that said that was their favorite activity. So to convert that to a percent, I'm going to do 66 divided by 366 times 100. So I'm going to take my calculator again. So I got 66 divided by 366 times 100. And when I do that, once again, since this is 18.0, we'll just call this 18%. So that would be the answer for number 12. Number 13, if there were 500 students in the school, how many would you expect to say visit with friends was their favorite activity? So the first thing I want to know here is what percentage of students would say visit with friends was their favorite activity. So if you notice here, 99 students said that that was their favorite activity. So to convert that to a percent, I want to do 99 divided by 366 times 100. So when I do that, here I got 99 divided by 366 times 100. And when I do that, I get roughly about 27%. So I'm going to put that here. Now what I want to know is what's 27% of 500? So to do that, I'm going to take 27%, I'm going to convert it to a decimal. So I'm going to do 27 divided by 100, which will be 0.27. So I'm going to take that times 500. And when I do that, I get 135 students. So that's how many we would expect to say that visit with friends was their favorite activity out of 500. And then question number 14 says, if there were 500 students in the school, how many more would you expect to say talk on the phone, which is 53 students, was their favorite activity instead of watch TV, which was 37 students? So the first thing I want to know there is how many more students in the graph would say that talk on the phone was their favorite activity rather than watch TV. So I want to do 53 minus 37. And when I do that, that comes out to be 16. So 16 more students said that talk on the phone was their favorite activity as opposed to watching TV. So from here I want to take 16 and I want to convert it to a percent. So I'm going to take 16 divided by the total times 100. So when I do that, I got here 16 divided by 366 times 100. So this comes out to be roughly about, since this is 4.3, we'll call it 4%. So I got that here. Now what I want to know is what's 4% of 500? So to answer that question, I'm going to take 4%, I'm going to convert it to a decimal. So I'm going to do 4 divided by 100, which will be 0.04. And then I'm going to take that, I'm going to multiply it by 500. So we would expect 20 more students out of 500 to say that talking on the phone was their favorite activity as opposed to watching TV. So that's some different things that we do with taking bar graphs and answering some different questions about them. So if you flip your answer sheet over and take a look at question number 1 in the practice problems 2.3f, you have this graph here, and it says, what kind of pet do you own? So this is numbers 1 through 7 in the classwork assignment that you're working on. So question number 1 says, what pet did the most amount of students own? So if you look here, you have cat, which would be the tallest bar here. So more people owned a cat than any other pet. So that's the answer for number 1. Number 2 says, how many students owned a dog, cat, or rabbit? So if you look here, it looks like there were 8 students who owned a dog. It looks like there's 11 students who owned a cat. And then it looks like there were 4 students who owned a rabbit. So if you put those values together, that would be 23 students altogether. So that's your answer for number 2. Number 3 says, how many more students owned a cat rather than a dog? Well, there were 11 students who owned a cat. There was 8 students who owned a dog, so the difference there would be 3. So you would say that that's the answer for number 3. Number 4 says, what percentage of students owned a rabbit? So the first thing I want to know here is how many students owned a rabbit. So that's 4 students altogether. So I'm going to do 4 divided by the total, and if you look at the directions, it says that there were 34 students in the group. And I'm going to times that by 100, right? So if I do 4 divided by 34 times 100, this comes out to be 11.7, so since it's 0.7, let's call it 12%. So this would be 12% of the students owned a rabbit. Question number 5 says, what percentage of students owned a goldfish? So I'm going to go here to goldfish. It looks like there were 6 students who owned a goldfish. So I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm going to convert that to a percent. So I'm going to do 6 divided by the total times 100. Right? So when I do that, here I got 6 divided by 34 times 100. So this comes out to be 17.6%. So since it's 0.6, let's call this 18%. So I got that there. So that's the answer for number 5. Number 6 says, if there are 500 students in the school, how many would you expect to own a hamster? So if you notice right here, it looks like there's 5 students that owned a hamster. So the first thing I want to know here is what percentage of students owned a hamster. So I'm going to do 5 divided by 34 times 100 to convert that to a percent first. So here I got 5 divided by 34 times 100. And when I do that, this comes out to be 14.7%. So since it's 0.7, let's call it 15%. And now what I want to know is what's 15% of 500? So to find that out, I want to take 15%, I want to convert it to a decimal. So I'm going to do 15 divided by 100, which will be 0.15. And then I'm going to multiply that by 500 students, And so we would expect 75 students out of 500 to say that they owned a hamster. So that's the answer for number 6. And then number 7 says, if there's 500 students in the school, how many more would you expect to say own a dog rather than own the hamster? Well, if you notice here, there were 8 students that owned a dog. There were 5 students that owned a hamster. So the difference there between the two is 3. So what I want to do now is I want to take 3, I want to convert it to a percent. So to do that, I'm going to take 3 divided by the total number of students times 100. So when I do that, I got 3 divided by 34 times 100. Let's try that again. 3 divided by 34 times 100. And I get 8.8%. So since that's 0.8, let's call that 9%. So we would say that 9%, there's 9% more students that own a dog rather than a hamster. So now what I want to know is, what's 9% of 500? So to do that, I want to take 9%, I want to convert it to a decimal. So I'm going to do 9 divided by 100, which comes out to be 0.09. And I want to multiply that by 500. And when I do that, I get approximately 45. So we would expect 45 out of 500 students, we would expect 45 more to own a dog rather than a hamster. And that's the answer to number 7. So pick up with number 8 on your own, and make sure you put your answers on your answer sheet. And then once again, when you're finished with the assignment, you can staple together what you have, turn it in, and take a copy of the homework assignment.